Take a look at a chicken in a backyard, and something about its behavior seems almost normal. It walks around, scratches the ground, eats, drinks, and eventually leaves an egg behind. But compare that with most wild birds, and the difference becomes strange. A robin doesn't normally produce eggs throughout the year. A sparrow doesn't keep building clutches through the winter. For most wild birds, reproduction happens during a narrow part of the year, when food is available and their young have the best chance of surviving. Yet a modern hen can keep producing eggs for months, sometimes getting close to one egg a day during peak production. So why does the chicken ignore the seasonal schedule that controls so much of the bird world? The first clue is light. For a wild bird, daylight is more than something that helps it see. Changes in day length can act like a biological calendar. As winter fades and the days become longer, specialized light-sensitive systems in the brain detect the change. That information affects a chain of hormones involved in reproduction. The brain sends signals that eventually activate the reproductive system. The ovaries become more active, eggs begin developing, and breeding behavior starts. This seasonal response is called photoperiodism, and it is an extremely useful system. Imagine a small bird producing chicks in the middle of winter. There may be less food, fewer insects, colder temperatures, and a much lower chance that the young will survive. Producing an egg takes energy. Raising a chick takes even more. So instead of reproducing whenever possible, wild birds have evolved to wait for the right conditions. Longer days arrive. Food becomes easier to find. Temperatures improve. The reproductive system switches on. For many species, that timing is so important that breeding outside the normal season would be a terrible investment. Chickens still have this basic biological system. Their brains can respond to changes in light, and their reproductive hormones are connected to environmental signals just like those of other birds. But domestic chickens have been pushed away from the strict seasonal pattern of their wild relatives, and humans played a major role in that change. The ancestor of the domestic chicken is the red junglefowl of Southeast Asia. Unlike a modern commercial laying hen, a wild junglefowl lives under natural conditions. Food availability changes, predators are everywhere, weather matters, and reproduction is connected to the environment. A farmer, however, can provide food every day. A cup can provide shelter. Eggs can be collected. And humans can decide which birds are allowed to reproduce. That changes the rules completely. Suppose one hen produces more eggs than another. To a person keeping chickens, that hen is more valuable. If her daughters also tend to produce lots of eggs, those birds become valuable too. Generation after generation, humans can keep choosing the most productive animals. That process is selective breeding. It doesn't require anyone to understand DNA. People only have to keep reproducing the animals with the traits they want. Over thousands of generations, those choices can reshape an animal, and chickens provide a remarkable example. Scientists eventually found an important clue in a gene called TSHR, short for thyroid-stimulating hormone receptor. When researchers compared domestic chickens with red junglefowl, they found a strong genetic difference around this gene. TSHR is involved in the system that helps connect seasonal signals with reproduction. That made it especially interesting. The domestic version of the gene appears to have weakened the bird's dependence on seasonal signals. The system for responding to daylight is still present, but the reproductive shutdown associated with the seasons can be less strict. Think of it like an alarm clock whose volume has been turned down. The signal is still there. The bird can still detect changes in its environment, but the signal doesn't control its behavior as strongly as it does in a wild bird. That helps explain how domestication could turn a seasonal bird into a much more consistent egg producer. But genetics isn't the whole story. There is another important difference between a modern laying hen and many wild birds. What happens after the eggs are produced? A wild bird normally lays a particular clutch. Once that clutch is complete, the bird shifts its attention toward incubation and raising offspring. A domestic hen can behave differently. If eggs are continually removed, she can continue laying instead of treating the nest as a completed clutch. This is one reason collecting eggs works so well. Humans didn't just breed chickens to produce more eggs. They also selected birds whose behavior made continuous egg production useful. And there was another trait humans could influence: broodiness. Broodiness is the instinct to stop normal laying and sit on eggs to incubate them. For a wild bird, that's essential. An egg has no value if nobody incubates it. But for someone raising chickens for eggs, a hen that stops laying and spends weeks sitting on a nest isn't ideal. So many modern laying breeds have been selected for reduced broodiness as well. Now the chicken has several traits working in the same direction. Its seasonal reproductive response is less restrictive. It can continue producing eggs instead of stopping after a small natural clutch. And many laying breeds are less likely to stop and incubate those eggs. Then humans added one more tool: artificial light. Light is one of the signals that influences reproduction, so poultry operations can control the lighting environment to encourage consistent laying. A hen doesn't need to see the sun rising and setting naturally to receive a day-length signal. Artificial lighting can change the amount of light she experiences. This is especially useful during seasons when natural daylight is shorter. The result is an animal whose reproductive system can be influenced by humans at several different levels. There is also a practical advantage to this consistency. A farmer doesn't have to wait for one short breeding season to collect eggs. A hen that keeps laying can provide food across a much larger part of the year, which made the trait especially valuable once people began keeping chickens in larger numbers. But there is an important detail people often miss. A chicken hasn't completely lost the biological system that connects reproduction to light. The system is still there. That's why lighting can influence egg production in the first place. What changed is how strongly the seasonal signal controls the final outcome. A wild bird receives the environmental signal and responds strongly. A domestic laying hen can receive a similar signal without shutting reproduction down in the same way, and that difference is extremely useful to humans. The wild bird is following a biological calendar shaped by survival. The domestic hen is living inside a system humans have reshaped, and the egg itself shows the result. One egg requires the bird to invest nutrients and energy into building a yolk, adding the white, forming membranes, and creating the shell. Doing that repeatedly is a major biological expense. For a wild bird, making that investment only during the right season makes sense. For a laying hen, humans have created conditions where producing eggs again and again can be successful. That's the real story behind the difference. It isn't that chickens are somehow completely different from other birds. They still share the same basic anatomy. They still have the same kind of reproductive hormones. They still respond to light. And they still carry biological systems inherited from their wild ancestors. What changed was the pressure placed on those systems. Nature favored birds that reproduced at the right time. Humans favored chickens that produced useful amounts of eggs. Those are two very different selection pressures. One optimizes reproduction for survival in the wild, the other optimizes reproduction for usefulness around people. After enough generations, the results become enormous. A wild bird waits for spring because its survival depends on timing. A modern hen can continue laying because humans have changed both the bird and the environment around it. So the next time you see an egg in the middle of winter, remember how unusual it really is. That egg exists because a bird's ancient seasonal reproductive system has been reshaped by domestication, selective breeding, management, and artificial lighting. The wild birds outside your window aren't doing anything wrong. They're following the strategy that kept their ancestors alive for millions of years. They wait for longer days. They wait for food. They wait for the season when their chicks have the best chance. The chicken simply became an exception, not because it stopped being a bird, but because humans gradually changed what that bird's biology was being used for. And that's why a chicken can lay an egg while the forest around it is waiting for spring.